Hello, welcome. My name is Alden Reed, and you're watching Arcane Tablets. Thank you for joining me for another Midnight Riff. Time to talk about some fun things, right? Maybe a little bit less tedious tonight. All right, so I've got a little bit more of a focused topic, and I've been talking about some of these things in my other videos, some of the videos I've made recently. I've been making a couple long videos, just kind of letting myself talk for really an hour, basically. And I do enjoy that, but I also certainly understand that it can be a little bit challenging sometimes to, have a lot of extra time to commit to some of my longer content. So I kind of want to talk about some things and be a little bit more focused and just get some ideas out there. So really what I want to talk about is the difference between good and bad and evil. And even though I've been talking about how, I'm not always sure about a lot of stuff, especially when it comes to, the deeper spiritual or metaphysical truths and structures of what's going on in reality. I've got a lot of ideas, and I do feel reasonably confident about a lot of the things that I'm talking about. I'm just trying to be honest here. It's a tough thing, right, to strike a balance between being confident and trusting your intuition, especially, right, which is really the thing you want driving things, and also, though, still remaining a little bit open-minded and understanding that it can be challenging. I mean, that's the problem with intuition, right? Even though intuition is theoretically more reliable, really, even than factual information, right? Empirical, factual knowledge, right? It's elusive. It's hard to truly know sometimes. And maybe it's even harder, especially, I think, if you're a man or if you're very masculine or mentally oriented, right? We tend to get very much caught up in computer brain. Facts and facts and facts, right? It's a little bit harder for us sometimes to drop down into our heart space and listen to our intuition and just find that flow. But anyways, so good and bad and evil and the difference between those things, okay? So first of all, let me say that moral relativism is absolute fucking bullshit. Don't even listen to that for a second. All right, people who advance moral relativism are kind of fitting into two different categories, right? One set of people are people that are maybe a little bit like me sometimes. They're generally very intellectual, really often trapped in their mind space, spend a little too much time thinking and justifying and rationalizing things, and they can just get a little bit distracted from their heart space, from what, the spirit and the soul is really telling us about these things, right? And so we can understand that and we can forgive that to a certain extent. But again, it's not an accident that it is men who tend to advocate moral relativism, right? Just like it is men that tend to advocate a lot of other things that we associate with being very mentally oriented and intellectual. We tend to get up there and overthink things and, again, justify and rationalize things away. That being said, I would say the more important category of people, the more insidious category of people that promote ideas related to moral relativism are people who do bad things, people really more specifically who are evil and are doing evil things. And let me just explain that I don't believe that on the deep soul level that anyone is fundamentally bad or truly forever evil, as it were, okay? But I do think, sometimes we incarnate in the specific lifetimes that we're in, and we can become incredibly corrupted, and sometimes you really do develop kind of a black heart and just get all up in that demiurgic void stuff, which I've talked about before, and I'm not going to explain everything because I want to just, again, talk about the main things here, right? Good, bad, and evil, okay? So, yeah, ultimately, I think that one of the biggest reasons that moral relativism is promoted is because there are people who kind of just want to do bad and evil things. They want to have a clean conscience, and they want to kind of not be taking all this flack necessarily, right? They get a little bit too oriented in kind of a service to self mindset and caught up in maybe some other things as well. And yeah, so I mean, I think that makes sense. That's really is mostly what's going on. And it's not an accident that people who promote moral relativism also, again, tend to be men and tend to be people that are maybe a little bit less into God at the very least. Maybe they believe in certain metaphysical ideas, but it's often the case that they tend to take a little bit more of a materialist mindset. Some of that Thomas Hobbes, life is nasty, brutish, and short, right? And just, I don't know, some of them maybe that Darwinian thinking, right, of just survival of the fittest. And then on a more insidious and occult level, some of that Aleister Crowley thinking, right? This is the really nasty stuff, right? The do what thou wilt is the only law of the universe. Oh. Why don't you go look into Aleister Crowley? Why don't you read about some of the stuff that he did? And yeah, it's controversial. I'm not even going to go into the specifics, of course. You know, it's not officially accepted in many circles, some of the things that he was into, some of the things that he was accused of. But I assure you, all of that stuff is quite true and much more. And if you're still watching this video, there's a decent chance that you're perfectly aware of the elite occult powers that be and the kind of things that they're into, especially now. And obviously they've been very ascendant, I mean, kind of since, you know, the fall of the ancient megalithic civilization, but, you know, really more specifically, certainly since the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment. Interesting. What does that word enlighten also bring to mind? I wonder. Does it maybe bring to mind any other organizations, perhaps? I don't know. We'll see. But anyways, yeah. These people really feeling themselves. They really just want to, you know, do what thou wilt, okay? And so that's really, in my view, kind of the primary source of moral relativism. And yeah, there's this other type of person who is not necessarily really trying to be bad or evil, but very mentally oriented people, often, again, men with very materialist mindset. And that kind of philosophy appeals to them because there's a little bit more of an inclination, especially if you're a man, to pursue that, you know, self-interested approach towards life, to be a little bit more in line with that raw, chaotic, void energy. And you know, women are perfectly capable of doing this as well. So I'm not trying to overly emphasize the masculine dynamic, but I definitely think that there's a big difference. I mean, gender dichotomy is kind of the most fundamental polarity in reality, ultimately. And we see time and time again that people that tend to be one way or the other are a little bit more inclined to certain behavior. And I absolutely believe that sometimes men can be a lot more feminine and sometimes women can be a lot more masculine. So, you know, there's a lot of complexities there. I think it has a lot to do with these layered metaphysical energies, especially astrological energy, but also some other kinds of metaphysical energy, archetypal energy, even some color energy, which is stuff that I talk about in some of my other videos. But ultimately, the point is that good is not a relative concept at all. Not at all, okay? Now, linguistically, we can be lazy about the way we talk about these things, right? We'll often say that something is good because it's something that we want. It's something that we like, right? So you'll say, oh, that's good for me. Or that would be good if that happens because it's an outcome that you want. But that's kind of just blurring language, really, okay? And this is not just semantics. This is very important, okay? Really, we should say, I want or I like, or maybe it would be better for me or worse for me. But when we really use that word good or bad, we're blurring something more important. And good and bad and indeed evil ultimately are very objectively absolute concepts, okay? And what is good? Well, generally speaking, it's to follow the golden rule. just as Yeshua and Siddhartha and Lao Tzu and many, many other spiritual sages and teachers advocated over the ages, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Very beautiful, very easy, very simple. Everyone can understand this. It's not overcomplicated at all, right? And so from a philosophical standpoint, from an intellectual standpoint, that's probably the easiest way to think about it. More generally speaking, it's also just about pursuing stuff that we know is good, right? Stuff oriented around love, right? Spreading love and compassion and understanding, being patient and kind, right? Trying to create a more beautiful reality, helping out the collective, not being too selfish, right? Now, I think it's also important not to be too selfless at the same time, and that kind of gets to another topic that we'll talk about more in the future. But on a more basic level, on a more primal spiritual level, though, I would also submit to you that you don't even need to think about it intellectually or philosophically at all, because you just know. And this is where it's so important to get out of your headspace, move away from computer brain. Dee-doo-da-doo-dee-doo. I don't know what's good, what's bad. Oh, I can justify anything. I can rationalize away anything I want to justify whatever feels good to me in the moment, right? That's what computer brain's going to do, right? And your body has a clearer sense of what it wants and doesn't want, and that's why you got to keep control of your body, right? Not let your body run the show. At least the body's a little bit more honest, though. We all know what the body generally wants, right? Whereas the mind is kind of just spinning and confused and just trying to figure things out and often vacillating, right? But the soul, your spirit, knows what is good, what is right, what is true, what is beautiful, what is in alignment with God, right? And the highest good for you and for all beings in reality. Just intuitively and naturally. You don't need to overthink it. You already know, okay? And you need to be careful when it comes to people that are trying to move you away from that, or any kind of philosophies that are trying to move you away from that, okay? At best, again, they're just kind of confused people spinning up in computer brain mind. And more often, and at worst, they're the people that are doing bad and evil things. Now, as far as the difference between bad and evil, right? So obviously, I've sort of defined good, and bad is the opposite of good. That's pretty easy. We understand that. But the difference between bad and evil has to do sort of with, I guess you would say, how committed you are to that, right? So even if you're good, even if you're doing a lot of good things, and maybe that's a better way to say it. I think that we all have a certain amount of good and bad in us. We all have the potential to do bad things. I think people that are even very good will at times do some bad things here and there, okay? And obviously there's a scale, right? It's bad to lie, or bad to steal, or bad to kill. But obviously killing is the worst, and then stealing is kind of in between, and then lying is less harmful. So there's obviously differences in terms of those things. It's not like everything is completely the same. Nevertheless, you still know what is good and what is bad, just naturally, intuitively, of course. And again, if you're struggling, just ask yourself, would I want someone to do that to me? Is that kind of violating the golden rule? And if it is, that's pretty solid. That's telling you that it's a bad thing, okay? And at the same time, though, even people who are generically bad or just kind of doing a lot of bad things, they're not necessarily irretrievably corrupted, let's say, okay? They can still do some good things. There's a lot of people that we might look around and say, they're kind of a little bit too consistently selfish, doing bad stuff that isn't really great, but they're not necessarily, going around causing tremendous chaos and destruction all the time. So, you know, again, most people are probably a little bit in between those things. Now, at the same time, I would also say that I think most people are trying to be good. So, in a deeper, fundamental way, I do think that people generally are good. And that's why I think that bad and evil people have to work very hard to do consistently very bad and evil things. Because most people recoil from that. Most people would prefer not to lie, would prefer not to steal, would definitely prefer not to kill other beings, right? So it's not an accident that people that are very committed to that have to work hard to sort of get other people, often to deceive and trick other people into thinking that that kind of stuff is okay, right? So, again, being bad, you can still do some good things, and you can always change. Just as even if you're kind of consistently good, you can become bad, and you're probably going to do some bad things, right? Evil is when you really are in the bag for the devil, as it were, okay? When you're just really corrupted, when you've just developed this black heart. And it is closely linked in many cases to acquiring too much power, too much material and political power. As the saying goes, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Power kind of frequently turns people into sociopaths or psychopaths, okay? And that is, I think, a fair way to characterize, honestly, unfortunately, the vast majority of political leaders and people, who make up the global oligarchy, the powers that be, right? They're basically a bunch of sociopaths or psychopaths at this point. And they've got more power than elites have ever really had, certainly since, well, before recorded history began at least. So it's not an accident that they're really, really very bad and, quite frankly, quite evil, okay? And it's a hard thing to hear, but sometimes when people fall, they fall hard, and there isn't necessarily a way back. And that's not to mean that they can't necessarily get out of that entirely, but I don't know. At a certain point, there may, for many people, be a point of no return where, at least in a given incarnation, they're going to remain pretty committed to evil things. And it's not going to be until their life review and then future lifetimes where they're going to have to face the consequences of what they've done, and then ultimately work off all that karma for all the bad and very evil things often that they do, right? So evil is really reserved for that special category, and that's why it's the opposite of live, right? E-V-I-L. L-I-V-E. Evil is when you're just so chaotic and destructive and hedonistic, and you just do what thou wilt all the time, not caring about anyone else. Again, in psychological terms, we call these people sociopaths or sometimes psychopaths. There's some subtle distinctions there, but I think that both terms are kind of getting at the same thing, right? A psychopath basically is sociopathic, but just maybe even a little bit worse or more obviously aggressive, but whatever. That's some minor semantics that doesn't matter much. The point is, they are definitely not following the golden rule, right? That's the hallmark of a sociopath, is that they're almost just don't even care about anyone else. Not even, other beings or animals or whatever, but people as well, right? And that's really the difference between good, bad, and evil. So these are absolutely real things, okay? They're not just relative concepts. They're not just in the eye of the beholder, okay? What you want and what you like, yeah, that's more subjective, but what is good and what is bad and what is evil, absolutely, that exists beyond any kind of subjective judgment. And even though we have free will, okay, and even though bad things will happen, indeed, bad things must happen, right? Without bad things happening, there could be no good. Moreover, without a cycle of life and death and without a cycle of creation and destruction, reality could not progress, the universe could not progress, okay? There would be no story. That's all life is. That's all reality really is. It's just kind of a never-ending story, a never-ending series of universes and stories where we just incarnate as actors playing out these roles. Sometimes as heroes, other times as villains, most of the time as something in between. And I think that that's another kind of difference between evil versus good and bad. You'll note that there's no kind of equivalent to evil on the good side, right? Okay? There's nobody who's just constantly always purely good in the way that some people can become constantly always purely evil. And there's some interesting reasons for that. At least, I don't know, you could theorize about it. I mean, I think, again, there's just always got to be a little bit of that darkness and destructiveness in anyone's soul, right? It's just part of incarnating. Whereas there's a stronger pull, especially during certain times and when certain things are happening, towards being even more and more deeply corrupted. And obviously, the more good you are, oftentimes that can kind of remove you from engaging too much in things going on, right? You have to have a little bit of will to power, even if you're a good person and you're trying to create good things, right? So, in many ways, yes, I think that sort of explains why evil is much more of a real thing. And again, most people are not super, super good or super, super bad. Most people are somewhere in between, but most people are trying to do good. And maybe that's the difference there, right? There are very few people that are trying to do bad, and even fewer people that are trying to be evil. But unfortunately, it tends to be, of course, that those people who gain and acquire power are very much in the category of people that are trying to do bad and indeed trying to do very evil things. Anyways, it's just important to understand these things. It's important to understand that moral relativism is nonsense, okay? It's nonsense. It's just bullshit coming from godless, void-worshipping people who are enslaved basically by the demiurge, by devil, by fear, and just obsessed with pursuing their self-interest, with pursuing hedonism, with doing what thou wilt at the expense of everyone else in reality. Just absolutely trucking right over the golden rule without a second thought once they're super deep in, right? And that's another reason why people who get into this evil stuff, right, they like to make sure that other people that they're trying to get involved are also getting into this evil stuff. And they like to promote moral relativism and subtly suggest to people that they should be more selfish. Oh, you're just pursuing, I don't know, what, natural selection or just whatever. It's all just a bunch of BS that they're just creating to justify doing bad things. So, yeah, you know, there's a lot of things that I am still working out. I'm not as sure about or as confident about, but I am 100% crystal clear about this, and you should be too. Don't even question. Don't even hesitate, right? Team God right here. Team love right here. And not an accident that the other team is not so big on God. Oh, and they might pretend to be about love, but again, that's another misuse of the word. That's using words like love and good in place of I want and I like, just to kind of say, well, I love it, it's good for me, you know, I want it, right? So, whatever, you get what I'm saying. But it's important to keep in mind, right? Sometimes the way we use this language can be a little bit sloppy, and I think that also can confuse people, but let's be clear. Be sure to disambiguate between this stuff, right? So you know what good is. You know in your heart. You don't even need to think about it at all. You just know. Okay? Doesn't mean you're always going to do the best thing. Doesn't mean you're always going to fearlessly pursue the good. But you certainly know. And I think, again, most people are really trying. And we're human. We're imperfect. That's okay. Okay? But don't listen to the other justifications, like I said. Yes, bad things will continue to happen. Bad things must happen. Okay? The universe could not exist without that. That is true. But just because something is necessary for existence does not mean that it is equal. Okay? It does not mean that there's no difference. There is. So, follow the golden rule. Listen to your heart. Pursue the good. And that's how we're going to make things better. You don't even need more complicated philosophies and ideologies and whatever. Lord knows I love thinking about that stuff too, but it is really basic. It is, again, just the basic stuff that Yeshua and Siddhartha and Lao Tzu and so many other wise sages talked about. So no need to overthink it. Okay? And if you're struggling, just follow the golden rule. Ask yourself, would I want that to happen to me? Right? If the answer is no, then you have your answer. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. I want you to know that I love you very much, that God loves you very much. I want you to know that you're wonderful, and you're beautiful, and you're perfect the way you are, even if you can always try to be a little bit better and keep striving towards the good, right? Okay? And for those of you who are committed to bad things and doing evil, I promise you, God is watching every second, taking notes about everything you're doing. And you're going to have a life review. And you're not going to be tortured. It's not like going to hell, but it will be unpleasant. I promise you. I promise you. It will be unpleasant. You're going to have a lot of karma to work off. And yes, on some absolute, very high metaphysical level, we do need people to play the role of the villain, right? There's no stories where there are no villains, okay? You wouldn't read a book. You wouldn't watch a TV show or a movie if there weren't some villains going on, right? Some people doing bad things. So there is a way in which, of course, we have to understand and appreciate that. But that higher truth does not mitigate bad and evil actively happening. And even though we have free will, and even though these things are always going to be something we have to deal with, God is still guiding and encouraging us to follow the golden rule and minimize suffering. Many blessings. We'll see you again soon for another Midnight Riff. Take care.